Hello and welcome to Talking Europe. This month we're taking a closer look at food safety here in Europe and around the world. This particularly relevant, of course, in the wake of the Fipronil egg scandal here in Europe over the past couple of months. We'll explain the differences in safety controls here in Europe and on the other side of the Atlantic in the United States. We start, though, here in Portugal, where agriculture represents 2% of the economy and 9% of the workforce. Its strengths include the wine-producing sector as well as the production of fruit and vegetables. It does have its weaknesses, though. They have to import a great deal of the meat they consume, and Portugal has to confront the fact that it has an ageing farming population. The average age of a farmer here is over 60. We'll be speaking with the Minister of Agriculture to talk about the impact of the recent spate of deadly forest fires on agriculture. But first, let's take a look at one of the key weapons in Europe's armoury when it comes to guaranteeing the quality of the food we consume here, that is to say, certification and labelling. To take a closer look at the question of food safety, we've come to this field of carrots about half an hour south of Lisbon in the Montijo region to speak with Isabel Berger, an auditor for the SGS certification company. Thank you so much for joining us. And you've brought a bag of carrots that were produced here in this field. Tell us more about what we can learn from the label and the ticket here about the traceability of the carrots.
Well, we have here information that is really very important for the traceability because it says it comes from Portugal, but it also says that it comes from a specific producer, a specific field, and which of the loads that took the product to the warehouse where they were prepared.
What's your role when it comes to certification and testing places such as this field?
So what we do as a certification body is we come to the field at least once a year, but it can be more. And we see all the information about the management of this field. So we see information about how they are managing pest controls, for instance. You've got here a trap that is used for this effect. How they are controlling the water of the irrigation system. Hello, Ruth.
Hello.
Can you give us an idea of the size of your production?
20,000 tons of carrots, 2,000 tons of potatoes per year, and about 1,000 of onions and 1,000 tons per year of onions.
Why do you have the certification?
These certifications are a plus for us as a company and also for our clients. They first were demands from the clients, but now they're also a way for us to learn and to improve daily with the new demands of the certifications too.
Was it difficult to achieve the certification that you got? How is it?
In the beginning, yes, it was a new step and being aware of all the demands of the certifications, but at the moment it isn't because we are only trying to keep them, and so it's easier now.
Hi.
Hello. Can I help you?
Yeah, we'd just like to try some of the local produce, if possible.
So we have two kinds of cheese here. One of those comes from the north, the region of Castelo Branco, and is made from sheep. Semi-cured, not something too strong.
Do you know these products?
I know, and for instance, those products come from a company that we have certified. This product is not smoked, it's just dried in a specific area where the weather is good for this kind of drying, and it's a good result.
Okay.
You will taste.
Okay, great. Well, I look forward to tasting it.
You should try it. Thank you so much.
Obrigada.
Well, let's get tucked in. We've got an array of Portuguese specialities here. Let's have a taste and see which is good. It looks pretty appetizing. What kind of guarantees, with these finished products that we've got here, what kind of guarantees do consumers have that this is a good quality?
I would tell you for all the products, traceability is nowadays compulsory. In our regulation, the European regulation requires traceability, but especially for meats and products that come from animals, like milk and there is a system that is implemented, and moreover, it has a system for control of the animals themselves. It has to be.
And so the consumer can have they have to just trust the system, it functions, or can they check themselves?
They can check in some labelings. There is, for instance, for meat labeling, if you buy a beef, you will look into the label and it will be mentioned where it has been grown, where it has been slaughtered, where it has been cut. It has to be mentioned on the label of the product. It's not so detailed for all products, but as a matter of fact, the companies that are involved in the food chain have to have this information and have to be able to link their production to their raw materials and to where they have sent the product themselves downstream. So it's compulsory.
When we compare the situation between here in Europe and in the United States, the legislation is a lot tighter here than it is in the US. Does that mean you're guaranteed to get a better quality of produce here in the EU compared to the States, or what's the perception there?
There are some criteria that are not acceptable here and that are accepted in the United States, so it's different kind of way to look at the way to produce. In Europe, the consumers are very demanding and they push also the policies.
Questions that's really dominated the food scene here in Europe. In 2017, the Fipronil scandal, which led to the destruction of millions of eggs because they were contaminated with the Fipronil insecticide. Given all the checks that we expect here in Europe, how did that kind of scandal occur?
No, it's because of the checks that we know that it occurred. Because other way around, we would not know, probably. There is control done, there is someone that used it when it should not have been used, but the situation is, as we have control, it was identified, and the EU controls work that we identified is that we are able to know where the products are, that we are able to destroy them. Of course, there are scandals, and there will be, but for me, it's important that the consumer knows. It's not something that nobody knows about and that is hidden. No, it comes to the news, it comes to everybody's knowledge, and action are taken.
Isabel Berger, thank you very much for your time and for throwing some light on the situation here in the EU when it comes to food safety. You mentioned there the Fipronil egg scandal that saw millions of eggs destroyed here in the EU after the discovery of an insecticide used in the production chain. Our reporter Anaïs Guérard travelled to Belgium, one of the countries first affected by the scandal, to find out more about food inspection there, from farm to fork.
Ever since the mad cow scandal in the 1990s, the origin of beef is meticulously tracked in the European Union.
1 week after birth, all of the cattle are identified with ear tags. Each cow is assigned an ID number, and it keeps that same number for the rest of its life.
First link in the chain, the farmer. For him, traceability is essential. Without verified identification and inspection documents, the animals can be neither slaughtered nor sold.
We scan the registration card to put all of the information into our system. Then the computer automatically puts that information onto a sticker.
The animal is then inspected by a veterinarian from the Belgian National Security Agency, by the Federal Food Chain Security Agency, and by the slaughterhouse.
5650, okay, this one is good.
The same ID number will be used to identify the animal in all of its forms. And when it's killed, permanent stickers are placed on its carcass. In accordance with EU law, each step of the process is regularly inspected and subject to compulsory self-inspections.
The self-inspection system, which is a European law, is the most important aspect of food security. Every company is responsible for applying the necessary measures to ensure that food chain security is guaranteed.
The so-called obligatory notification rule, which is unique to Belgium, requires companies to immediately inform the national agency of any anomalies. And it's thanks to this system that authorities discovered the Fipronil egg contamination scandal, which affected multiple countries in Europe, including Belgium. In addition to tackling fraud and non-traceability, the European Commission plans to reinforce cooperation with the Rapid Alert System for Food and Feed.
In April 1997, when we perfected the system, and this is how it comes that now we have one of the most unique and robust systems in the world.
But the European Commission has been slow to create adequate legislation for labeling processed foods. a deficiency which led to the 2013 horse meat scandal.
Unfortunately, there is still progress to be made. Here we have beef burgers, but modifications have been made with spices. It says 95% meat and 5% spices, but there is no label that requires the origin of the processed meat to be specified.
France, which Brussels granted a 2-year test period, started trialing processed food labels in early 2017. The country will submit its report to the Commission at the end of 2018.
Now we've come to Lisbon's Agricultural Science Institute, and we're joined by Portugal's Minister of Agriculture, Luis Capoulas Santos. Thank you so much for joining us today. Now, one of the big questions in the agricultural sector here in Portugal has been the recent forest fires. Over the past 6 months, they've cost 100 lives, caused a great deal of destruction. How has that affected the agricultural sector here in Portugal?
We are suffering the climate change consequences. The conditions about the humidity, about temperature, about wind are absolutely not normal situation. Some days we have about 500 fires. What we really need is to modernize our own system of combat.
What's Portugal doing to cope with the changing climate?
We are trying to use better the water resource, more efficient systems of irrigation, and it is today possible to have more irrigated areas with the same water, and at the same time using crops more adapted to the situation.
Moving on to agricultural practices here in Portugal. I believe genetically modified crops are still used here in Portugal. Why is Portugal perhaps bucking the European trend of rejecting GM crops?
We are a very prudent approach in Portugal, and as in Europe, we only allow to produce one variety of corn that is a GMO in very limited areas. And in the Portuguese society, there are a perception that GMOs are not the solution until the moment we have enough scientific answers that we don't have in this moment.
One of the big controversies in Brussels this autumn has been the decision whether or not to prolong the authorization to use the weed killer glyphosate. Portugal has abstained really on that question. Why that position?
As you know, the glyphosate is not used on crops. It's used to combat the herbs and not used directly in the products we eat. But of course, there are also the problem of inhalation. And this is why we decided in Portugal to forward the utilization in the urban areas. But in agriculture, with the operators that use the protection systems, the prudent approach is to not to be against until the moment we have more scientific evidence that the use it's a serious problem. And this product is necessary to maintain the competitivity of some agriculture activities.
Luis Capoulas Santos, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Now, as we've been hearing, one of the big questions here in Europe has been whether to authorize or not the use of the glyphosate weed killer. Our reporter, Alix le Bourdon, went to meet some French producers who are reassuring customers and testing their own produce to find out what exactly they're selling.
It's early morning in the central market in Rungis, where this load of apples are about to undergo a testing process. Before hitting the market stalls, they're passing through a checkbox. This lab employee has taken a sample to measure possible traces of pesticides in the batch.
We're doing an analysis of about 400 pesticide residues, and there is a greater potential risk for some products. We can assume, for example, that a lettuce is at greater risk than an apple.
While it's not a compulsory test, this wholesaler asks for it to be carried out nearly 40 times a year anyway. According to him, it's an expensive but necessary step.
The quality of products has never been so good as it is today, But our consumers are anxious. So obviously we want to prove to them that what we sell is healthy and good.
None of the samples tested by the company last year exceeded the authorised limits for pesticide traces. But according to the French Confederation of Small Farmers, these steps aren't enough. The union is campaigning for the total ban of pesticides.
The maximum residue limits for endocrine disruptors are far too high. They have negative effects on human health at doses sometimes 1,000 times lower than the maximum allowed limit of traces.
A total ban would upset agricultural practices as they stand now. But this farmer chose the middle ground. Since 2011, he joined a network of farms committed to reducing pesticides and has diversified his crops.
Crops like sunflowers or broad beans require a lot less protection like fungicides or herbicides, so it helps to lower traces of pesticides.
However, he can't see a future with no pesticides at all. To get rid of the weeds on his crops, for example, he has no choice but to use a substance called glyphosate.
Organic farming is another way of working. I know we have a neighbor not very far from here who has organic crops. I know how it works, but I'm not ready to do that. I already use a lot less pesticides, but to go from there to organic would be another step.
A strategic vote on the renewal of glyphosate authorization in the EU is being held this month. France is leading the campaign to reduce the duration of this license.
That's the end of our look at the situation here when it comes to food safety and food security here in Europe. We're going to cross the Atlantic to take a look at the situation there when it comes to food safety and food security. Next stop, New York. Do tune in.